Hi. One of the first or one of the most common questions that we face in the last 30 days to CAT is about the verbal section, and in the context now of the CAT 2011, it's the verbal ability and the logical reasoning section. And students typically are running from pillar to post, trying to do something about, especially about their scores and how to improve it. And I guess you all realize that the last 30 days is not about improving the quality of your English. That's to be done in a longer term process, if I may say so. It has to take maybe a 6-month to a 1-year framework when you're talking about improving the quality of English of yourself. But still, there are a lot of things that you can actually work on and work towards when you're talking about the last 30 days prep, and it can actually make a huge difference to your scores. Now, what you need to understand about any aptitude test like the CAT is that there are two parts to what you score. One is ability, the second is performance. Now, there might be two kinds of people who might be listening to this or watching this video. One, with respect to verbal especially, one are the people who are pretty comfortable at language and who find this to be their strength. For them, the message is very clear that you need to actually ram home the advantage that you are going to get out of this section. So and in fact, even for the other category of people who are somehow trying to get across this section, we will talk about that towards the end of the video. But for both the categories of people, the first focus and perhaps the main focus is to identify the sources of error in your thinking in verbal. So what happens is that when you solve a question, let's say you solve a question on parajumbles, or you solve a question on reading comprehension, or any other question type in verbal ability, including reading comprehension, is not an area where you can actually solve something. It's about doing some thinking inside your mind. And ultimately, if you make an error in a question, it's because that thinking is wrong. So if I was in your place, what I would be doing to improve my scores in the last 30 days would be to look at what are the sources of errors. So if I solve, for instance, if I solve a test paper of 30 questions, which had 20 verbal questions, which included 9 or 10 reading comprehension, 10 verbal ability, and let's say 10 questions on reasoning. So we'll get back to reasoning towards the end of the session of this video. But when you're talking about the 20 questions that you're facing in verbal, if I was in a place, what I would do would be, I would look at solving those 20 questions first, and then try to look at, without looking at the answer key, I would try to judge how many of those are definitely correct for me, and how many of them are probably correct, and how many of them are, I believe are wrong after the first solving. And that gives me the scope for improvement, because if there's a question which I was thinking is probably correct and it turns out right, the question I need to ask myself is, what do I need to improve my conviction about this? If a question which I was thinking is definitely correct turns out to be wrong, then obviously there's some huge error in thinking which I've made while doing the thinking. Because verbal ability, unlike maths, is not step oriented. It's you take in information, you process it inside your mind, and your mind has to output you with the answer to what has been asked. And this whole processing is where the intelligence between your ears is tested. And that's what is looked at. Please remember this, that every verbal question has one clear answer. And a well-framed verbal question, which you can expect all questions inside the CAT to be, the answer to that question can be defended in front of 1 lakh people. Hence, if you got it wrong, you obviously could not see the logic behind the answer. So, what you need to target, what you need to target when you're solving questions on verbal, or when you're trying to develop your verbal skills, solving skills, what you need to target is that thinking, and how you can actually upgrade the quality of the thinking. What are the wrong thoughts that lead you to the wrong answers? So when you analyze your errors that have come out, so an error would in my view, in my book, an error would also be a question which you thought was probably correct and it turned out to be correct. I would call it an error in your thinking, because it means that you are not clear about your thoughts. So even that is an error for you. So you need to get after these errors, and wherever there needs to be a rectification in the thought process in your mind, you need to do it. And this happens question by question. This does not happen that somebody is teaching you reading comprehension, somebody is teaching you parajumbles. You will find the stuff in every question, and what happens over a period of time as you solve 100, 200, 300 questions on a specific type, you realize the kind of traps they set for you. And once you know those traps, you can actually consciously try to avoid them. The other major aspect that you need to know or need to understand strategically for the 2011 CAT specifically is the fact that when you're talking about logical reasoning coming into verbal ability, now there are the two things you need to know. Why have they done this? Obviously they've done this to remove the skew towards quantitative minded people that the CAT had. And second, they've also removed this, it is also a blessing in disguise for the quantitative minded person who is very poor at English, because he now gets a tool, the 8, 10, 12 questions, whatever come out of logical reasoning in the verbal section, that gives him a tool to reach at least 60 to 70% of the cutoff value. And whether you're good at English or bad at English, reasoning is something that you should be able to handle and tackle, because every question in reasoning can get solved. It's just about using the data in the right order, the information in the right order. So the other factor of what you should be doing in the last 30 days, apart from going after the errors that you are doing continuously in verbal, the other main thrust of the last 30 days is to push yourself on the reasoning front and reach the point that if somebody gives you a reasoning question, your initial expectation based on your belief of how you can perform in reasoning, your initial expectation should be that I am going to get through this question. No matter how tough the question is, I am going to be able to solve it. That has to be the key. So build that belief. In fact, the last 30 days is more about building beliefs than learning new things. Just remember that, and I think you should be fine. The third major aspect of the verbal logical reasoning section, I mean, if you look at expected cutoffs, I personally believe that if you can get to a situation of 18, 19 all correct, you should be fine. So if you're good at language, naturally good at language, that's not going to be a problem for you. But for those people who are weak at language, the people who are going to struggle at language, the strategy has to be the 10, 12 questions in reasoning, whatever number they come, nobody can predict that. But whatever questions come in reasoning, you have to kill them. And after that, you target 1 or 2 question types in verbals where you expect questions to be right. So you need to get your practice to that level. But if I solve a reading comprehension set, my answer key, I don't need to check with the answer key given. I would be very surprised if something goes wrong. You need to reach that point. So the skills required to develop that, you have to focus on that. Thanks a lot.